Hello, and thank you for tuning into the Keto Answers podcast. I am your host, Dr. Anthony Gustin, and we have a doubleheader this week. So we have Dr. Jesse Chappus, as well as his wife, Marni Wasserman. These two have an incredible story about how they met each other, how they both got started on their health journey, and what I really loved about this episode is that they dug deep into something that I have a personal history with, which is dealing through trying to become a better, healthier you, and what that means in your life with the relationships you surround yourself with. So if you're one of those people who are out there looking for emotional support or any type of community support, we go into depth here about how to get that from either your partner or your friends or your family. Excellent episode. So tune in and I hope you enjoy. Before we get to the episode, I wanted to chat about our sponsor, Perfect Keto. Perfect Keto is all about making a ketogenic diet healthy and accessible. Whether you're reading all of our online guides or articles or enjoying Perfect Keto's exogenous ketones or any other keto-friendly products, everything you need to make keto work for you is at perfectketo.com. I know what you're thinking. Hey, aren't you the founder of Perfect Keto? Yep, that's right. And all of my insanely high standards have been put into making each and every product. My background as a functional medicine clinician helps me craft the cleanest and healthiest possible products and best information about a ketogenic diet. Head on over to perfectketo.com to learn anything you need to know about the ketogenic diet. And if you've never tried any of our products before, feel free to use the code KETOPODCAST for 20% off your first order. That being said, let's get into the show. All right, Jesse and Marni, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, you guys are a unique pair here. I kind of want to break it down one by one and chat about where you guys got to where you're at and maybe how you guys met. But let's just start, Jesse, since we have a very similar path. Why don't you just let us know how you got into health in the first place?
Yeah, I just back in undergrad, I always had this draw to the sciences, biology. And I started out undecided in undergrad and eventually found my way into human kinetics or kinesiology and just studied anatomy, physiology, and just fell in love with the sciences. And initially, I thought I was going to be a physiotherapist. And along my journey, I had a chance to volunteer at a chiropractic office and just had a great experience there and just did a co-op there during university. And got to go to a chiropractic seminar with that whole team there. And it just one thing led to the next. And I ended up getting into chiropractic school in Toronto, which I grew up in Windsor, which is just 4 hours south of there. And there's actually only one English speaking school in Canada for chiropractic. And I was just so grateful to get in and went there and had such a great experience and practiced chiropractic for 4.5 years. So coming out of school, got into practice, and I'm sure we'll get into this in a little bit, but during that 4.5 years that I practiced, we started a podcast, and that ended up becoming our full-time gig and what we do today.
All right. And so what type of chiropractic did you end up practicing? I know that a lot of people, I think, are very focused on and think that it's just a very simple thing where chiropractors just adjust people and then leave their office. Well, some may do that. What was your approach?
Yeah, I was the type of chiropractor. I don't know if I fit under a specific type of niche or whatever, but what I would do is I would spend about half an hour on subsequent visits with my patients. So I would reassess and speak to my patient and get to really find out what was working, what wasn't, as the patient would come in. And we would do a treatment that would probably take about 20 minutes. So I was doing a lot of muscle work. I went and took ART. I took 3 different courses of ART. So I was full body certified in that. And I did acupuncture as well. So I was spending a long time with my patients. And I've always had this passion for health and wellness and nutrition and lifestyle and all this stuff too. So as I was doing the treatments and beforehand and before they left the office, I would really get into it with patients and share my passion and share this knowledge on how to take their lifestyle to the next level. So I was treating quite differently than a lot of the other chiropractors, but it was just very satisfying, and I just felt really good with the way I was working.
Was there anything in particular that kind of led you on that path in the first place, other than just the interest in kinesiology, or was there a moment when you're like, okay, health and healthcare is important, and I want to invest my time into improving other people's?
I think part of it probably was the school I went to. And I don't know this for a fact, but I've heard that different schools kind of have different philosophies. So the school I went to in Toronto was very science-based and really taught chiropractors to practice the way that I practice. So it was just a natural transition for me coming out of clinic in fourth year and having that year of practicing that way. And it just felt right to me. And again, I continued to evolve over that 4.5 years I was in practice, but I just really, I'm a people person. I love connecting with people. And I think, at least in my opinion, to make the kind of difference I wanted to make in people's health and in their lives, I really needed to take that time. And obviously, financially, it's a little bit tougher if you're spending that kind of time with a patient, and it's hard to necessarily justify charging a certain amounts for spending that extra time. But for me, it just felt right, and I loved it.
Yeah, in my clinics, that was one of the struggles that we had. It was easier in San Francisco where we were able to switch to kind of a cash-based model primarily, but a lot of people don't realize that most stuff isn't covered by insurance. I'm not sure how it works in Canada specifically, or where you guys were based, but where we were, like in the United States, you can do a bunch of treatments, and even though it's best for the patient, it may not be covered by insurance. And so you get a model where you're kind of incentivizing providers to just do things where they want to get compensated for their time because they have to run a business and need to put food in their plate as well. It's kind of a weird model that we have going on.
Yeah, with the way I was practicing, a lot of patients did have some extended coverage, but a lot of people were paying out of pocket, and yeah, it just they saw the value, and I was definitely delivering it.
Great. Well, we'll leave the cliffhanger for now on what happened afterwards. If Marni, you want to maybe tell us a little bit about how you got into all of this health focused stuff?
Sure. I've always been a girl that loved to eat, loved food. So as I grew older and got more involved in, what was out there for me to learn and take on, I took kinesiology as well. So that's something Jesse and I both have in common. I went to university for kin and loved it. And that brought me into personal training. From personal training, that got me really fascinated with nutrition on a very different level. I'd say I was always really healthy growing up. I always gravitated towards, you shared in your story as well, Anthony, towards, low fat this, lots of good whole grains, clean, quote unquote, yogurts and trail mixes that were out of a bag, not homemade. So things that I thought were healthy. So I always started with that as my foundation. And as I started to learn about the body and what it needed to fuel, and as I, started training people, and, at that point it was about results and what were people going to eat to get results, that started to grow over time. So at that time, I thought I wanted to become a dietitian because that seemed like the next logical step. So I did everything I could in my power to get into dietetic school from my kinesiology degree to go to become a dietitian. And very quickly did I realize how that was not who I was. It was very treatment focused, very clinical. If you wanted to work in a hospital and work with people who were sick, then that's a really great path for someone. But for me, I was already about prevention. I was already working with people in the health community, and I needed to find something that fit that model. And I was so grateful to have come across a person who told me about holistic nutrition. And then I followed that path. I went on to become a holistic nutritionist here in Toronto at the Institute of Holistic Nutrition. And my passion for food kept growing and growing. And that took me to culinary school in New York. I went to the Natural Gourmet and became a chef. And I came back home to Toronto and started teaching cooking classes because that was the perfect way for me to bring my message in the way that I needed to, which was in the kitchen, to show people how to eat. It was enough of telling people what to do and what to eat, or not have people listen to me. I needed to show them. So cooking classes was the foundation of my career and my business. And that lasted for about 10 years. And I just actually wrapped things up about a year ago and closed up my food studio that I had in Toronto, where I was teaching people. Early on, it was about vegetarian cooking. It was always whole foods based. And I was a vegetarian for a number of years. So that was the big focus of it. And then that started to shift. But just as that really took a shift, I ended up closing up shop. And as Jesse mentioned, the podcast started somewhere along that way, which is now almost 4 years ago. And here we are now with the podcast as our full-time business, and another way for us to deliver our message now of healthy living, healthy eating. And it's really fun.
Yeah,
it's who we are.
I can't wait to dive into what you guys are doing now. But until we get there, what happened to bring you to being a vegetarian, and then how did that transition to where you're at right now?
So getting into, you want to know about becoming a vegetarian at first.
Yep.
Yeah. So I had this friend when I was younger who was vegetarian, and there was something at the age of 13 that got me thinking, this is meant for me. I don't know when or how, but like vegetarian just seems like something that resonates with me. I was an animal lover. Meat just started to gross me out early on. I tested the waters for a couple of years, then came back to just chicken and fish. I'd taken red meat at that time. Then years later, as I kind of went back into the health world, and especially around the time that I was starting my holistic nutrition certification, that was almost 10 years ago now. And that's when raw food, vegan living was really, really big. And I had caught on to the cycle of going to all kinds of health talks and seminars, and I was accumulating books. And it just seemed like this is the time. This is so right for me. And it felt right for my body, for my mind, where I was at. And I took it on, and it felt great. And it was, it was fun for me. It was a culinary challenge for me to work with so many different vegetables and foods. And I was learning so many new things, and going into culinary school was really good timing with that, following up after that. And then I, spent a few years being a vegetarian, felt great until I suddenly didn't. My body started to shift. I started to notice discomforts in my stomach, I was having gas and bloating. I was having other kinds of irritations in my body. So many different things were just pointing in the direction that something is wrong. But for the longest time, I didn't think it was my diet, because I was probably the healthiest vegetarian. I really calculated all my macronutrients. I made sure I was getting enough protein. I wasn't just eating pasta and carbs. I was eating a really good balanced diet. But something wasn't right. So after many trips to my naturopath and, reading lots of articles, digging into blogs, speaking to guests on our show, I started to understand that it's possible that being a vegetarian isn't supporting my health, and maybe it's time to look elsewhere. And it took some time to wrap my head around that emotionally and psychologically. And eventually I started to slowly reintroduce animal protein back in. So it was about a span of about 7 years that I was vegetarian. And then about 3 years ago now is when I first started to reintroduce eggs. Then I did fish. Then I did chicken. Then I did a little bit of red meat. And now it's just kind of this mixed bag where it's more of a paleo-ish diet, where I've taken out the beans and the grains for the most part. And I've supplemented that with a little bit of animal protein, lots of fat, lots of vegetables. That's always been a constant. So that's where I'm at right now.
So how long did it take for you to realize that your symptoms that you had that were kind of nagging at that point faded away?
So after about 5 years being vegetarian, I was really thriving. When I kind of hit the 6 or 7 year mark is when things started to really go downhill, and I started to really, notice the shifts in the way I was feeling. So that's when I really started to take inventory of what's going on. And last year I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's thyroiditis, and that really started to paint the picture of what my diet needed to look like and what foods I needed to eat to support my health and my thyroid gland and the way I was feeling. So luckily some of the shifts I was already making before I found out about that I had some of the shifts that I was making before I found out that I had Hashimoto's were working towards supporting that. But now that's kind of been confirmed. And I feel like the way that I'm eating now is supporting the way I want to feel ultimately. I have started to feel a lot better, shifts in energy, definitely shifts in, my lab work. My antibodies have gone down, and I'm really just working on my thyroid right now. That's my ultimate goal. But of course, at the end of the day, I do just want to feel well. So I know that I'm doing the right things, seeing just the shift over the span of the last 5 to 8 years, I'd say. I've noticed that overall my skin feels better, my energy is overall better, my digestion is better. So things are moving in the right direction.
That's great. And I think that it goes to show that everything is kind of a work in progress. I mean, even myself, I'm working through a lot of gut issues right now. I've had tons of food poisoning 4 times this year. So it's always a work in progress. And a lot of people like to idealize people who are in this space and doing a lot of work, but always realizing that everyone's probably working through something or has a goal that they're not at yet, and that perfection is probably never going to happen.
100%. And it is, it's constantly, people always think, especially, having a health podcast and me being a nutrition educator for so many years, that I've got this story that I figured everything out. And actually my health crisis happened later. I started my whole journey in my career out of passion and, being inspired and wanting to educate people. And then, as the years went by is when kind of my health started to break down. So it's really interesting that I'm kind of going through my big story or transition right now, and I'm excited to see where it goes, and it will keep going.
That's amazing. Out of curiosity, so I always think about, obviously nutrition is the biggest factor, I think, of improving people's health. And I always think, how can we get people to change their behaviors from where they're at into where they should be eating real whole foods, which I don't think we can argue with is obviously the best course for humans. And, I've thought, is it education? Is it participation? And is it cooking? And you focused a lot on cooking for a long period of time. Did you notice a big behavioral shift when people they discovered that it wasn't a lot of work to actually make something that was healthy and taste good, and giving them those tools of cooking did that shift a lot of stuff, or what was your perception there?
For sure it did, because that was my whole motto, was showing people that everyday eating can be simple and delicious, that they can take really basic recipes, or not even a recipe at all, basic ingredients, and put meals together at home for themselves, for their family. And when people started seeing that and I started getting that feedback, like, oh my goodness, I didn't realize I could not only make dinner for my family tonight, but have lunch the next day, and it didn't cost that much and it didn't take that much time, a lot of barriers fell down of, healthy eating isn't this far out thing that, you have to either hire a chef or you have to buy 1,000 ingredients from that cookbook. It's not like that. And I think when people do take control of their own health and take it into the kitchen and do prepare their own food, they are going to feel better. They are going to at least have that connection to making a meal at home and being a part of that experience of what's going into their bodies and understanding that. And then what those ratios of foods that they're choosing, that can be a whole other conversation. But at least making whole food meals at home is a really good start for a lot of people.
So what were maybe the top things that, if people don't have time to go to a class to learn how to cook, were the biggest shifts in behavior that you saw from people that if they're listening, they're like, oh, I can't cook an egg, and cooking eggs would be a very good place to start. Is there anything like that either it's a skill or a type of food to make? Anything that you saw was the highest amount of impact that people could do readily?
Believe it or not, I think it was greens. I think people were intimidated by a lot of the different kinds of greens that were out there, and not just broccoli and spinach. Most people are like, okay, yeah, we boil broccoli at home, or we microwave it and put butter on it, whatever it is. People were familiar with those veggies. But once we started exploring things like collards and kale and chard and arugula and dandelion, and that you could throw them into a soup, throw them into a stir fry, saute it in a pan with garlic, and just see the variety of things that can be done with just greens, and how they can and should be the base or complement to many meals during the day. It was, I think, life-changing for a lot of people, which was interesting for me as a nutritionist, because it seems so 101 and so basic. But seeing people walk out of there like, oh my God, I can't wait to go look at the produce aisle and look beyond the broccoli and find something else, they really felt empowered with that.
Yeah, one of the things that I always find hilarious is when I cook for people who have never had my cooking before, they're blown away. And the thing is, they don't realize that I cheat, because I just use stuff from farmers markets or local ranches and just get the freshest food possible. And then I barely have to do anything.
And it tastes so good.
And it tastes amazing. And so they're used to eating, spinach, baby spinach out of a bag that's been sitting there for weeks at a time. And then they come eat some fresh, dandelion greens or something like that. It's going to taste a lot better and a lot different. And so I think that's one of the biggest things I tell people is just eat stuff that's as fresh as humanly possible, and it will just taste that much better.
And you have to do a lot less. Exactly that. And I think that was another big point for people, is that less is more. Like, you don't have to do a lot with the dandelion or the chard. You can literally just, steam it, or just put it on the side of your plate and let all your other ingredients meld into it. Like, nothing fancy.
Right. And Jesse, what was your nutrition path, and how did you think about things growing up? Had you always been kind of whole food based, or was that a moment when you had a shift in your thinking?
I remember being in my teens, and my dad got into alternative health at that point a little bit. And I remember him reading Raymond Francis's book, Never Be Sick Again, and Fats That Heal, Fats That Kill. And I think that started to plant the seeds for me. And what really kind of turned things to a new direction for me was when I was in chiropractic school, and it was actually digging into YouTube videos. So through YouTube, I found the raw food world. And from there, I just started to embrace eating more and more plants and eating a lot of raw foods. And eventually I was vegetarian or vegan. I don't even know. I kind of transitioned between those two titles, raw food. And I think initially that's kind of how Marni and I got on each other's radar. We were both in this like plant-based, healthy space. And we were closer enough in proximity. She was 4 hours away from where I was, but we just kind of both embraced this whole scene and these lectures and just eating more plants. So for me, that was a way of being for a period of time. And just, I think for me, the turning point was just, again, well, I guess part of it, or a reinforcing point. I don't know exactly when I started including more meat. It's kind of on and off a little bit for a period of time. But what really reinforced this way of eating paleo style that Marni and I are doing today is the podcast. And now we've been doing it, Marni mentioned, for almost 4 years now. And just hearing all these guests come on, story after story of people, transitioning from eating a vegan or vegetarian diet. And it just feels really good and balanced right now for Marni and I. And I think that it is a constant evolution, and we're going to continue to tweak it. And an area we do want to kind of play in that we haven't really gotten into is the keto world, and actually getting a blood meter and seeing, what it feels like to actually be in ketosis. Because we've tried like higher fat and tried to kind of eat that way, but we've never confirmed we were actually in ketosis. So I think that'll be an area of discovery for us in the near future. But yeah, our journey has been kind of parallel, and it's been fun.
Yeah. And so this is where you guys met, through food?
Yeah, definitely through the health space for sure. It started with Jesse actually inviting me to write for his blog back in 2013. And I was married at the time, and, there was no connection there. And then a couple months later is when my marriage fell apart, and I was looking for someone healthy, for lack of a better word. And I remember this guy, Jesse, that reached out to me, and I thought, hey, he likes to run. I know he does marathons, and I know he's into healthy living, and he lives far away. That's good, because I'm not ready to commit yet. So why don't I reach out and see what's up with him?
Yeah. So we'd meet halfway, 4 hours. So we'd meet somewhere in between, and we'd go for these bike rides and go eat at these plant-based restaurants, healthy restaurants. And we just enjoy our time together, being outside, being out in nature, exercising. And the visits shortly, it didn't take that long, became more and more frequent. And we did the long distance thing for probably about 3 years, I would say.
Yeah.
And more often than not, I was making the trek into Toronto, the big city where Marni was. And there was just, a lot more going on in our scene there. So we'd go to different health shows, and we had a lot of friends that, and still do, that are involved in the health world in that city. So yeah, it just became this back and forth. And then I moved to Toronto for a year. And then I guess it's been a year and a half. We actually moved back to my hometown. So we're in Windsor now. So we're out of the big city. We're in a more simple, balanced lifestyle for us right now. So we've kind of, we've had a journey with our locations, and now we're living this more simple, balanced lifestyle, and it just feels really good.
And no need to pry unnecessarily, Marni, but just curious, and shut me down if this is too private, but your previous relationship in your marriage, you guys talked about how you bonded over being very healthy and that being a focus, and obviously an area where you supported each other. Was that something that you didn't have in a previous relationship, and that was something that you knew you wanted when that ended?
It's interesting because we did have it to a certain degree, but when you break it down, it wasn't his core. It wasn't who he was. I think he adapted who he was to become healthy or want to embrace that lifestyle. But it really came down to a core value difference. And that was what Jesse did have, is that our core was the same. And to be kind of funny, when we started dating, like I felt like I was dating myself. I'm like, oh my God, this is like the male version of me. Is this exactly what I want? This is so different than what I know, because and then I got to see the value in having someone who believed in a healthy way of life the way that I did. And it wasn't something I had to teach, or I had to pretend, or I had to do behind closed doors, or I had to feel ashamed of. This is exactly who Jesse was. And that's really what made it so easy for us to get along.
Yeah, which is something that I don't think people really understand. Like, I know there's this common thing that says you are the average of the 5 people that you hang around the most, but obviously you're going to be a much higher average of the person you spend 95% of your day with or your time with. And relationships can, and I experience this as well, on paper, look and sound great, but when it comes down to taking actions, if something who you want to be is a super healthy version of yourself, and you have a partner who maybe is not on the exact same page, and you kind of split apart, I think support systems fall down really, really quickly. And it's easy to get distracted by the momentum of life and be carried into a direction that you don't want. And then you look back a month, a quarter, a year later and realize that you've been developing or executing on habits that really aren't who you want to be. And so I think that the importance of relationships and choosing the people you want to be with first having the self-awareness of this is important to me and this is who I want to be, and finding people who can support that rather than people that you're going to be at odds with is super important.
Yeah. And I mean, it wasn't easy. We were 4 hours apart and we wanted to obviously spend a lot of time together, but it was, we just felt this connection because of these core values that we shared and this core interest that we shared. And, it ended up over time working out beautifully, and we're just so happy. But just to throw that out there, it wasn't easy, but we just pushed through and made it work.
Yeah, it's amazing. And same thing, like a very long time, I was in a place where I was in a relationship. It just seemed like everything was a kind of a struggle and a negotiation and a compromise. And now I'm in an amazing relationship where everything just feels effortless. And I think that support system helps me maintain a crazy life right now, where I'm traveling around and running several different businesses. But I have someone who, one, keeps me accountable, which is a huge portion of sometimes what I need, because I can get distracted very easily, and also supports it. So it's just a very effortless thing. And I would assume that you guys have probably a very similar relationship in that regard.
Yeah, it can even come down to really simple things where, we're just both on the same page. If we're going to Whole Foods and loading up the cart and spending $350, like if two partners aren't on the same page with buying high quality food, spending money on organic and healthy, cosmetic products, and the list goes on, I could see that being a really point of frustration and could cause a lot of problems. But for Marni and I, it's like, we're there supporting each other and just, it might actually feed the other way and become a little bit of, it's not a problem, but you know what I mean? Right. We got to be careful.
Yeah. Well, and everything we do, like, on the weekends, we both want to go to the farmer's market in the morning. Like, it's just, we have the same agenda, so to speak. And, to go one step further is we actually work together. So we're not, split during the day and come back, together after 5 p.m. Like, we are doing this podcast full time, working from home. So our work and our life, they're so intertwined, and we luckily love what we do. We're both, passionate about health and educating people and helping ourselves. And we both get to do this together all the time.
And I think it can be hard enough for one person who's an entrepreneur and gets into a quote unquote job that they're super passionate about and just love doing, where it's hard to create that balance, right? It's hard now, especially with social media and the internet, and there's always different moving parts, and it's hard to really separate quote unquote life from the business. And when you have two people that are on board and doing that together, I think it can be an extra challenge that, we're still evolving and figuring out over time.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of evolving and figuring out, do you guys have any habits or things that you do for health that are opposing each other, or that you have to kind of manage? Like, oh, I like to lift weights, but I like to run, or I want to go to bed at 8 and you want to go to bed at 10. Like, how have you figured out differences in that, and maybe figured out how to make things work?
I think early on, this was more of an issue. We're, not really an issue, but, our sleep patterns are very different. Jesse was more of a night hawk. He could stay up really late at night listening to podcasts or watching YouTube videos.
Or editing our podcast.
And I'm an early to bed girl. So we had to kind of figure out a rhythm there. And same with waking up in the morning. I'm much more readily to get up and be energized in the morning. And Jesse's a little bit slower in the morning. Or would maybe rather sleep in a little bit longer. But now that we're living together, we've kind of figured out a system where, now Jesse's almost adjusted his clock more or less, where he does get tired now early. We make sleep time a priority to get in bed before 11. And if anything, now Jesse's the one encouraging me, come on, let's go to bed. It's time. And in the morning, same thing. So that was one area that I know that there was a big difference between us.
I think a lot of times with those things, you kind of meet in the middle, and it kind of happens organically over time. So when you end up living together and you're, figuring things out, I think over time we've just kind of found this, and using the sleep example, we found this really happy place where we're not going to bed too late and we're not getting up super early, and it just, works for both of us.
And in relation to, you brought up exercise, like I am more apt right now to do more intense exercise. I do like to go to spin classes and attend TRX classes, whereas Jesse's really a big fan of walking right now. And he used to be a marathon runner, but now that's where he's at right now, is kind of more just walks and simple.
Yin
and
yoga
easy.
too.
Yin yoga. We do that together. But in terms of just like, I'm so much after right now, like, the difference, but it's not an area of contention. It's just, that's my time. I get to go and do my thing in the morning, and Jesse goes for a long walk.
Yeah. And we do have a lot of things, luckily, that we have in common that we share together. We both love biking. We're on our bikes all the time. We do have a dog, so we're going for walks all the time and bonding during that time. And yeah, we each have our own things, but again, we do come together on a lot of them. So it works out.
And so obviously one of the things you guys came together on was the podcast, the Ultimate Health Podcast, which based upon your guess is the Ultimate Health Podcast. I think you guys have had everybody in this industry on at least one time. And it's an amazing resource. So you guys were just into stuff together and you just thought, hey, let's try something and let's do this and let's help other people. Or how did this start in the first place?
Well, it started with Jesse's passion and interest in podcasts. He was a podcaster. Actually, before we started our podcast, he had a podcast and he was an end user listening to podcasts.
Still am.
Still is big time. And so I guess back in, what was it, 2000?
Well, we started the show, I think it was September 21st, 2014. So coming up on 4 years.
But when we first started dating, well, not first, but a couple months into dating, I think you started to drop the idea of, we should start a health podcast together. And I knew about podcasts, but I didn't really see the value in it. I was so busy with my food studio, teaching cooking classes. I couldn't really wrap my head around it. So it did take time before I opened my mind to the idea of, okay, this could be fun. This is something we can do on the weekends when we're together and connect with different health people in the community. I had a lot of connections. Jesse had a lot of connections. We thought, okay. And he knows how to do all the tech stuff. Let's give this a go. So all the credit goes to Jesse for getting this going for sure. And yeah, so we started in September 2014 and we've put out a show every week since.
Every week, huh?
Every week.
And we started a second segment along the line too called Focus Fridays, where we put out smaller, about 10, 15-minute episodes, and we do those on and off too. So yeah, it's been a lot.
So how has that evolved over time? Obviously in the beginning it was probably just you guys wanting to spread your knowledge and maybe learn from other people, but how is your perspective on what you guys wanted to do with it from week 1 to week couple hundred, or where are we at right now? Like 200 some?
We're coming up on 250.
Yeah.
So, I mean, one thing that's evolved in a huge way is our presentation quality. If you go back to the beginning episodes, sometimes we'll go back and listen to some of the early ones, and more so me than Marni, like just the cadence of my speech, like I'm just slow and methodical, and it's quite painful for me to go back and listen. But and I think that's part of the beauty of it too, where this is like almost like a journal of our evolution. So when you go back in the early episodes too, you're going to hear a lot more about eating plants and being plant-based. And
the guests we had on too, that matched that, and who we were interested in at the time. And
over time, you can just see, again, leading back to what I was saying before, hearing these guests time and time again come on the show and tell us, like this diet didn't work, or this diet didn't work, or there was an evolution to this other paleo-ish diet, we'll say. It just, you can see us evolving over time, which I think is just kind of cool.
So as far as when you guys started versus now, you have different guests, all this different stuff. Has the focus, did that ever shift from obviously, plant focus or whatever, but just general health? Have you kind of dived into other areas of interest of like mental health or just physical health, or how have you thought about that evolution?
That's been the beauty of our podcast. I think even from day one, yes, in the early days, it was all about superfoods and chocolate and plants for sure. But very quickly, we started to expand into mindset, yoga, fitness, sleep, so many different areas under the umbrella of health. So at this point, I don't even know how, like we do still get a lot of diet experts on and people talking about nutrition, but we've been so into mindset and
I don't know if you mentioned finances. We just try, and anything that can be under that umbrella of wellness basically is fair game.
And topics that we're into at the time, depending on our evolution, as we've mentioned, as well as, if if we come across a book or a topic and we're like, wow, that sounds, something really interesting and seems like a great conversation. So there's been a lot of surprises along the way, like people who we never would have known about or did know about. And then all of a sudden we learned about and found a beautiful message through that. So it's been really interesting meeting all these amazing people over the years.
And it's interesting too, because when we started, we both had other careers going on. And for quite a while, I'm trying to think of the exact timeline when I quote unquote retired from chiropractic, but that would have been, I don't know, was it a year and a half, 2 years into the show?
Probably 2 years. Yeah.
So I was in practice by day, and I would be, if I had time in between patients or whatnot, I would be editing in my office, and then after work I would be editing the show. So that's part of the evolution as well, where in the beginning it was just Marni and I, it was just a hobby, and we were doing everything. So over time now we've taken on an editor, and now we have an assistant working with us, and it's just, everything is just running, it's continuing to evolve, but it's running a lot smoother now, and we have a lot of help, and it's just been a really fun and beautiful evolution.
And I think it going from a hobby or something that we did kind of on the side to our full-time business is something we never expected. We didn't plan on that. When we started the podcast, we weren't like, okay, 4 years time, we're both going to quit our jobs and this is going to be our full-time job. Like, I would have never expected that this is where I was going to be in 5 years. I never thought I was going to close up shop and transition to the online world. And what we see the podcast as now is the foundation of a new business, like of an expanding umbrella under this brand of Ultimate Health, that so many other things can happen in this space. So we have the podcast as kind of the
catalyst,
right. To get this going. Exactly. So it's so exciting just to see our online community grow. We're really in touch with a lot of our listeners. We're creating different products. There's so many things happening that we're super excited just to see it evolve and see where it goes.
And I think that's kind of an interesting, course that it took, because it could have easily been a bigger brand and then a podcast as an offshoot of that. But for us, we're going from a podcast and now figuring out, because this is our baby and our business, how are we going to, continue to grow the brand in the direction we want to go from this show? So our website is ultimatehealthpodcast.com. So we're kind of like locked in and trying to figure out how like we can open this up into a bigger thing, Ultimate Health, and have the podcast still as our main catalyst, but we want to definitely continue to expand out.
Yeah. And this is one of the things that I noticed when I was in clinical practice. There's still a lot of learning, but I think once you get to a certain point, you're seeing a lot of the same problems and same symptoms and the same type of presentations of patients over and over and over again. And I am challenged on a day-to-day basis every single day, unlike ways that I am a week ago or a month ago or a year ago. And it's such a rapid evolution from start to finish. So, that being said, Jesse, you had also a very, very similar path to me. So I'm super curious to see how your identity shift was from full-time clinician to now kind of like scalable online business health entrepreneur.
I think for me, while I was in practice, I did love for sure what I was doing, and I loved helping people and connecting with people one-on-one. But by the time the podcast got to a certain point and it was time to go in that direction and leave practice and retire from that, I was ready. And I don't know, it's hard for me to go back and say exactly what it was, but we just did an interview with you on our show. And I know for you, a big part of your evolution and continuing to grow is reaching more and more people and making sure that you're having the impact you want to have. And for me, again, same thing. Like, this podcast is worldwide and we're getting millions of downloads, and it's just the impact we're having on people compared to what I could have had in practice. It's different for sure. It's totally different, but we're already having such a huge impact, and this is only the beginning for this brand and this podcast.
Was it a struggle initially when you phase out, or was it just one day you were not there? And how was that transition kind of as just looking at your identity of something? Because for me, I think it was a little bit weird. The first day I wasn't treating people. I'm like, oh, this is just how it is now. And I don't have that type of relationship day to day. It was super strange.
Well, for me, there was, and probably for you too, there was quite a lead up to it. So it didn't happen overnight. So I had a day that I was actually going to be leaving practice, and I got to build up to that point. And it was actually a lot of transition. It wasn't just that I was leaving practice that day. And this was April 1st, 2016, I believe. And I was actually heading, I don't know if it was that night or the next day. It might have been that night after practice. I was heading to Toronto. So I was leaving my hometown as well and moving to a new city. So it wasn't just leaving practice. It was leaving, the town that I grew up in and knew. And Marni and I were living together for the first time too. So there's a lot of news all at once. And
a new dog.
Oh yeah, we had a new dog that we had gotten probably like 3 weeks before that too. So raising a puppy too. So there was a lot going on, and I was really ready to embrace the change and be with Marni, living together, and just building this podcast up, because there's only so much you can do. I'm so big on focus. I say it all the time. And I feel like, Anthony, you're probably very similar in this respect. I know you have a lot going on, but you seem like when you're on something, you'd be a really focused guy. And for me, I was just so excited at that point to be able to focus in on this passion of ours. And you probably hear my voice. I'm still equally or more passionate about our business and our podcast as then. So for me, being able to really get in and just put all my time and energy into it was just such an exciting time.
So Marni, what was the transition like for you?
For me, it was interesting because when Jesse moved to Toronto at that time, there was no plan at that point of being full-time with the podcast, or me not seeing that my food studio was going to run for another 10 years. Like that was, Jesse was moving to Toronto. We were probably going to continue our life there. So my transition happened in a very short amount of time. So within that year, I don't even remember at what point that I made the decision that this is not what I want anymore. I was in a 5-year lease. So I was year 4, I think. No, I was at year 3 at that point out of 5. So I wanted to get out in year 4 and not be there for the last year. So I had to act fast because I was done. Like I was like, I can't do this anymore. My heart is not in the same place as when I started. I've been doing this for 10 years. So it was 5 years in a food studio, and I started my business actually in my parents' home. So the whole span of my business was about 10 years. And I was just ready for a change. And as I was changing my diet, I'm like, I can't be running this plant-based food studio anymore. I either have to change it to like a paleo food school or, do something else. And I was, my health was really declining at that point. So I really wanted to put a lot of time and attention to me and my well-being. So that decision came really quick, where we decided that I was going to, give the word out that let's see if someone can take over my food studio. Jesse and I started contemplating, where are we going to live? We don't want to live in Toronto anymore. We were living in a very busy part of Toronto right across from my food studio, but it was a hectic intersection, a lot of horns and honks and fire trucks and people. It was just crazy. So we knew we wanted to get out of the city. And when that decision was made, I was so ready. So then again, there was a lot of steps that had to be taken. I needed someone to take over that lease. I needed to get everything in place. So that all took time. But when things started to get in motion, it was super exciting because we were just so happy to be making this shift and being able to focus on one thing. And I was ready to not only put my efforts into the podcast, but also just put my efforts into something different that wasn't the food studio. I knew I had so much to give, again, that I could reach people through the online space. And it's not something that I had explored too much with. Like I always had social media accounts and I always had my newsletter, but now we had this opportunity to step into something new. So it was exciting and it was all right, but it was, stressful in the process in a very short amount of time.
Yeah. So I think that one of the things that people undervalue is where they live. And I think that you guys made a very big shift, like you were saying, from Toronto to a much smaller place in Windsor. And I kind of have this dual lifestyle now going between Austin and Brooklyn. And like when I'm in, like it takes me a few days whenever I come back to New York to not be like this just crazy stressed out being and not to have all these noises and all these people and all this stuff affect me. I have a lot of strategies now where I can adapt to pretty quickly, and it's usually shorter stints here than in Austin. What were the transitions like for you guys when you first moved, and what have you noticed as far as either benefits or downsides?
Well, Well, the first benefit is that we were able to move into a home versus a 1-bedroom apartment. So we had a lot more space. And that was something that was really affecting me in particular. You know, I get very claustrophobic in small spaces. We had a dog and I had Jesse in my little apartment. And there was, you know, in the summer, there was no air conditioning. There were so many things just around my physical space that needed to change. So moving into a home that had a backyard and had different bedrooms that, you know, one could escape to, and we could have, you know, room to do different things in, that was huge. Secondly, we're on a quiet street in a neighborhood. And, you know, just having that quiet in contrast to where I was living was amazing to be able to go to bed at night and not hear, you know, an ambulance. And I know, like, I'm sure you can relate to that being in Brooklyn or New York. And I lived in New York for a short period of time when I was in culinary school. So, you know, that I know that world very well. So just having that quiet was really big. And the most important thing is just the balance we're able to create in our lives, in our day-to-day experience. And, you know, we have the time and the freedom to get up and go for a walk and decide how our day wants to look, depending on what we have scheduled with interviews or, you know, the time blocks of things that we have to do for the brand. But overall, we have the freedom to do that. And we take advantage of that. You know, we go to yoga classes, we have meetings with friends, we get out into the community. And the biggest thing that we were able to do in the last year is escape to Florida for a couple of months because we could do that. We can take our business anywhere. So we had that time freedom, and that was huge.
Yeah, and we're actually just working on what next winter is going to look like as well. So we want to hopefully go back to Florida for, we did 6 weeks last year, maybe do 6 weeks or 2 months this year. And, you know, that was the first time we'd ever done that. And it was a real test phase to see, you know, how portable is this online business of ours. And it worked out fantastic. We went to a warm climate and brought our microphones and just basically brought our lifestyle to a warmer, more pleasant climate. And I'm so excited that this is now, the door's open and we're going to just continue to evolve this and see where we want to spend the winters.
Yeah. And this is something that's pretty incredible. One of the things that you guys probably had individually with the clinic and with the food studio is community of people you were helping. And I've realized recently that moving cities is obviously a huge disruption to community as well as changing professions. So how do you guys now think about fostering communities either locally or online with your business?
Yeah, community is so important for us. And we'll start with just locally. And I think coming into a new city, Martin, correct me if I'm wrong, but we set out the intention and had the mentality that we were going to, you know, make that effort to get out and meet people and connect with people.
100% we did. And we already had a couple of relationships that had developed because Jesse lived here and I came to visit him over the course of the 3 years. We had already nurtured and cultivated different relationships. But I don't know how Jesse and I do it, but we managed to just meet like the right people. Like we're connected with the yoga community here and, you know, the foodie community. And it's so amazing that because of this intention, and I guess just being in this space, we're going to go out to those events or we're going to make sure that we connect with the right people. And we're so grateful right now that we have an awesome community here in Windsor, an awesome community in Toronto. We have one in Florida too. Like it's amazing to have all these, you know, different puzzle pieces all over the world, and definitely through our podcast, just having these connections with people. Hopefully we get a chance to meet a lot of our guests when we do travel around, but it's just so nice to build these relationships.
Well, the podcast too, it's interesting you bring that up, is kind of like a primer now too. When we travel, we just got married actually a week and a half ago.
Congrats.
And we went on, thank you. We went on a mini moon after. And we just went to this small city, you know, just kind of tucked away in Ontario. And I think it was through our Instagram, we found out about this beach yoga going on, sunset meditation.
Yeah.
And it was one of our listeners that pointed it out to us. And then I think the amazing Elixir coffee shop that we ended up finding in the town, we would have found it anyways. It was a small town, but somebody pointed that out to us as well. So it's like wherever we go now, because we have this worldwide community, it's like we have a primer to connect with amazing like-minded people wherever we go, which is just amazing.
Yeah, I always forget that on social media, I can usually throw out when I go to a new city, hey, who has any recommendations here? And I get flooded with just an amazing support system. And I think that I undervalued what can be done through an online community. I think both local and online are important, but so much can be done online. You can have such a crazy amount like you said, just traveling the world, and like the amount of connections that I have now just worldwide is astonishing. And I think that without the podcast businesses, that certainly wouldn't have been possible. What else are you guys doing to kind of get people rallied up? I know you have a Facebook group for the show. Anything else like that?
Yeah, I think, again, coming down to focus, what we put our energy into is basically three different things. And number one, well, we won't number them, but the podcast itself, we're putting out a quality show at least each and every week. And then we have our Facebook community where I think we're coming up maybe on 5,000 people in there. And that's Marni's baby, and that's her passion to be in there interacting. I'm in there a little bit too, but she loves the community aspect, which is another interesting part about the whole business and having Marni and I involved together, where we do have different interests within the business. So it works out really well and complementary. So she's a real community. She has a real passion for that and gets in there and interacts with the listeners. And Instagram is the third. So there's so many social media platforms now and so many different areas that we could delve into and put our energy into. But I think an important part for our growth and maintaining our well-being, because again, like, how much energy are we all going to be able to put into all these different things, is to have a focus. And for us, it's been those three things. And would you agree, Marn, that that's been important?
Yeah. And that's why we've really maximized those areas. And it just allows us to have better relationships within those different platforms, or to put out a better product with the podcast, and to make sure that, our group is constantly growing and our Instagram has great content. So absolutely.
Yeah, it's harder than people think. I try to also provide value on platforms like that, and it's difficult. But I think that it's well worth the investment, and just the amount of people that you can reach through platforms like that is staggering. So one of the things that I wanted to chat about is that I have kind of like a 4 pillars of health that I have thought of that are kind of foundational, which are nutrition, sleep, stress, and movement. I mean, you guys have broken it down a little further into what you think are the 6 pillars of health. And I'm just curious as far as how you guys approach that and what those things are.
Yeah, this was episode number 2 of our show, when we wanted to kind of put together the foundation of what Jesse and I believed was the pillars of health. And I think they have evolved over time. 1 or 2 categories kind of morphed into something else, but, a lot of overlap with yours. We've got nutrition, sleep, movement, self-care, community,
and hydration.
So
you just want to break some of those. So let's just start with hydration and water. What are the things that you guys think are super important there that people could foster a better relationship with maybe what they're drinking and why?
For sure. So quality water has always been huge for us, and we've evolved this over the years. But where we're at right now is at home. We have a Berkey water filtration system, and it sits on, a little countertop that we have, and we're able to filter our own water, and it's delicious. And we found out about this a couple years ago. We've been told about a few different systems. I used to have RO, reverse osmosis, in my food studio and in my home back in the day. But now that we're in a new city and, we don't know where we're going to be a year from now, we think the Berkey is probably the best investment. It's not that expensive. It's really wonderful and easy to use, and it provides really delicious tasting water.
And we're going to be going to Bali coming up for our actual honeymoon in September. And water quality is very important to us. And we've heard about these Berkey travel water bottles. So we're going to pick up a couple of those and learn more about those. But that's going to be an important part of our strategy when we travel.
Yeah, for sure. And another source of water that we love, and we haven't been doing too much of it lately, but it was a huge part of our journey at moments during our relationship, is spring water. So when we have the opportunity, we love to go and harvest and collect our own spring water in big glass bottles and bring it home and drink it. It's so good. It's so vital and fresh and vibrant. You actually feel such a difference. So unfortunately, in our immediate area, there is nothing super close by. If there was, we'd probably be getting this a lot more. But it is more of an adventure, something we can do maybe when we're on holiday or around areas that have some springs. We're near Michigan, so we should go explore Michigan, which we keep talking about. We haven't done it, but we do love spring water. So that's another source that we highly value.
It's amazing. And then we've touched a little bit about how you guys approach nutrition. I think that's pretty straightforward. Movement in community. What about the other two, the sleep and self-care? How are you guys focusing on sleep?
So sleep, yeah, that's a constant evolution, and we're continuing to play with that and tweak that over time. But for us, like as a staple, we're trying to get to bed. Marty mentioned, I think before, between about 10:30 and 11 every night. And we're not 100% great with this, but we're trying to make sure our electronic devices are off at least an hour or two before that. And we use, I forget what they call it on the cell phone, but the thing that makes the screen orange.
Night shift.
Night shift. And we have our blue light blocking glasses that we can use when we're watching Netflix, if we're watching it on the big screen TV. But we want to be better at not being on these devices at all. And we have like an awesome opportunity because we have a little campfire pit in our backyard. So we can go back there. And I think we should definitely during this time of year take more advantage of that and get back there and just have campfires at night, chat, connect, and yeah, or reading. That's another area too, where we want to get more into reading at night and just getting away from the devices.
And our room is super dark, which is huge. Just having like blinds that, make the room totally black, and having really good sleep materials that we're sleeping on, our mattress and organic cotton sheets or bamboo sheets, and really good comforter. So all those things really add to the quality of sleep. And those are investments that we've made over the years that really make a difference. And someone can use an eye mask as well if blackout blinds doesn't work for them.
Yeah, I think that people don't realize that like the investment into the sleeping equipment, so to speak, but the bed, the sheets, the pillows, you spend a third of your life there. It should be something that basically sets you up for the other 2/3. And so it's super, super important to make sure that you max that out as far as an investment goes. At least that's how I've thought of it. Especially even in, I would say, undergrad and grad school, when I was tremendously broke and couldn't afford like reasonable food. That's something that I always prioritized, was having that my sleep and my sleep setup 100% maxed out.
And just to expand on that, I have to comment, I have a new side sleeper pillow. I'm talking to two chiros, but I'm not a fan of sleeping on my back. It's like not something I can do comfortably. But I have a side sleeper pillow, which was over $200, well worth every single penny. I have the best sleeps now. It's kind of a boomerang shape. So it's kind of a V shape. It kind of tucks under, like over my shoulder, under my neck. And ever since I got that, I'm having the best sleeps. And
another thing I'll throw in too, and we're actually not currently doing this, but we were, and I just need to get it set back up properly, is we have a timer for our Wi-Fi. So I think it was between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. we had it, so it automatically shut off every night, and we just wouldn't have the Wi-Fi going while we sleep. I'm not too up on if there's a lot of research behind this, but to me, it's a good idea to minimize that if possible. So that's something we're going to get set up properly again. But we're also talking about potentially getting the Wi-Fi removed from our house and hardwiring into. So we'll see where that goes. But in the meantime, we definitely want to get this device, which we picked up at Home Depot. It's probably like $10 or $15, and you can just set this timer up. And once you set it, you can forget it. Except in my case, I have to fix it again. But
but I mean, not even to mention just removing the possibility of going on. Let's say if you keep a phone in the room, and if your computer can't get on, you're going to minimize a lot of work hours, which I think leads me to the last pillar that you guys mentioned, which is self-care. So how do you guys approach that on a day-to-day basis, and what's important for you guys there?
And this is a big thing that since we made the shift to Windsor, we have allowed these routines to really flourish. So for me, having a really solid morning routine and finding time in the morning, and it varies, of course. Not every morning is the same, but my ideal morning and what I like to do when I have the time is I like to get up, I like to hydrate, I like to go sit on a biomat, or if someone has some other kind of device that might work for them. We also have a sauna now. That's another way that we could implement that in the morning. I like to journal, I like to stretch, walk my dog. And these are all things that nourish me in a way that just connect me to myself, make me feel good. So building in a routine like that for me in the morning, it works. But for people who are listening, finding time during the day that you can take that outlet and do something for yourself. And it could be a lot of the things that we've already talked about, like going to a fitness class or getting some movement in, or getting together with friends and building community. Those can all nurture yourself in a different way. That means a lot of things to a lot of different people. But ultimately, it's just taking time for yourself. And it's something I really value. And the more of that I have for myself, the more time that I spend, whether it's a beauty routine, I take more time in the bathroom, taking care of myself, whether it's, dry skin brushing and moisturizing or taking a bath. All those things add up to building up myself and ultimately help me be a better person.
Taking time to create balance, time to recharge. And you mentioned bath there. That's an area I want to delve into in the future. We've been here almost a year and a half and I haven't had a bath yet, but getting into Epsom salt baths and using some essential oils, I think that's on the, that's coming up for me.
What else are you using, Jesse, to work with your self-care?
Yeah, for me, self-care just is taking time to go for long walks. I listen to a lot of podcasts while I'm walking and just taking time to unwind, get out in the sunshine, get outside of the house, because it is so easy to, as being somebody who works from home, just get locked in front of the computer and just, hours fly by, especially when you're doing something you love. So for me, getting out and having those walks and getting sunshine this time of year is just so important for balance.
So you keep mentioning you listen to tons of podcasts. Which are the top maybe 3 or 5 that you guys sink your teeth into?
Oh man, that's a good question. It's well, the thing about a lot of the podcast listening we do is to prepare for a lot of shows. So we'll listen just to see, how upcoming guests sound and what questions are commonly being asked. Like, obviously we don't want to ask the same questions as everybody else. There's always going to be some overlap, but we want to create a unique experience when somebody comes on our show. Top of my head, I'll just name a couple. Maybe Marni can name a couple. The James Altucher Show. Love that one. Tim Ferriss Show. Marni, what are you into?
I like Leanne Vogel's podcast, the Keto Diet podcast. Who else? Felix Helix. That's about autoimmune conditions. It's something that I'm kind of into right now. That's for my own self. That's part of, I guess, my self-care routine. What's another one that I've been listening to? I like Abel James. He's such a great podcaster. I love listening to him. Fat Burning Man.
Dave Asprey Show.
Yeah.
Bulletproof Radio.
Yeah, we rotate through quite a few of them.
Yeah, we're all over the place.
Luke
and before
Story.
When I was Luke Story's
Luke
great.
Story, the lifestylist.
Before when I was traveling to, because I think I mentioned this before, but I did a lot of the traveling to Toronto on the weekends. So that gave me 4 hours there, 4 hours back in the car. And I fully embraced and enjoyed that time because it gave me time to listen to podcasts. And I have such a hefty list that I am subscribed to and so many great shows coming at me all the time that it gave me a chance to just, at the end of a busy week to take some me time and unwind and catch up on my show. So now I do that through walks.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good comment about mindset like you were talking about earlier. I mean, my flight back to New York was delayed yesterday, and I was like, oh, great. I get to listen to a podcast for another 2 hours. Fantastic. So
isn't it all about perspective too, eh? It's like
totally.
Some people are like, oh crap, I'm caught in traffic. For me, it's like, oh, not so bad. This is extra podcast time or whatever it is. Like you can totally make use of that quote unquote useless time.
Right, totally. And I want to be respectful of you guys' time. I think we're over an hour. So thank you so much for coming on the show. And if you guys want to give people where they can find you, I know you're in a bunch of places.
So the best place is at theultimatehealthpodcast.com. That is our mainstay for all of our shows and episodes. And for sure on Instagram at Ultimate Health Podcast. We are constantly posting our life, our stories, pictures of food, recipes. It's all
and
there.
Be sure to check out our community as well.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for all you do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Keto Answers podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. But even if you didn't, I would love a review. Just go over to iTunes, wherever you listen to your podcast, and pop in a review so we can get found by more people, get better guests, and have the information that you need. So please go to iTunes, wherever you listen to your podcast, and leave us a review. And if you're new to keto, head on over to perfectketo.com/podcast and enter your email for all our top tips and guides on getting started with the ketogenic diet. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.